As the Israel Hamas war stretches into a third week, the world continues to brace for the likelihood of a ground assault into Gaza by Israeli forces. At the same time, there's growing fears that the situation in the Middle East could escalate into a wider conflict. In recent days, Israel has been striking targets in the occupied West Bank, Syria, and Lebanon. And the United States has moved 2 aircraft carriers and thousands of troops into the region. For more on this developing story, we've reached Nader Hashemi. He's an associate professor and teaches Middle East politics at Georgetown University in Washington. Hello.
Hello.
Broadly speaking, what's the risk of the Israel-Hamas war spreading into a wider regional conflict?
I think the risks are very high. We're seeing a major humanitarian crisis unfolding before our eyes in the Gaza Strip. It's already killed 5,000 people, at least 2,000 children. We've seen certifiable war crimes, possible crimes against humanity, and the Israeli land invasion of the Gaza Strip hasn't even begun yet. So when that does happen, that will increase the political temperature. I think there's a chance of the expansion of this war into other countries, regional countries being destabilized. We are looking at a major world crisis unfolding before our eyes, and it's unclear how this is going to end.
What role does the Lebanese militia group Hezbollah play in this?
Well, they are a major military force on Israel's northern border. They have quite a bit of capacity to rain havoc on major Israeli cities. They're backed by Iran. They have a deeply antagonistic relationship toward Israel. If they get involved, then Israel is fighting a war on 2 fronts. That means that Iran will be further involved in this war beyond the role that it already is playing. And then we have an expansion of this war. I suspect that will produce higher civilian casualties, increasing the political temperature, not just in the region, but around the world.
What are you most concerned about when you look at what could come next?
Mostly from a human rights perspective, the loss of civilian life. We've already seen 1,400 Israelis, the vast majority civilians being killed. Roughly 2 weeks ago, we've seen over 5,000 Palestinians. That number can increase dramatically depending on the length of this war. And of course, that is going to harden attitudes in the region. It's going to make the prospect of a political settlement down the road much more difficult. It's going to increase negative attitudes in the region toward the West, toward the United States. It's going to be a huge gift to the forces of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, who will use this moment to gain new recruits. So I think, these are the things that I'm watching for. I'm very concerned about where this is headed. I'm very concerned about, what the region is going to look like when this is all said and done.
U.S. President Joe Biden pledged financial and military support for Israel when he visited the country last week. In your view, what's the likelihood of the U.S. getting more involved in a broader war?
The longer the war goes on, the greater the likelihood of an American military involvement. It's clear that the Biden administration does not want to get further involved, but it's being dragged into the Middle East. I think it has no one to blame but itself. U.S. policy thought that the Israel-Palestine conflict didn't matter. It completely ignored it. Now it's blown up in its face. And so now we have a major deployment of American assets to the region. I don't anticipate we're going to see American troops on the ground, but I think the possibility of American military strikes on targets that are attacking Israel are very high. I suspect that American military bases could come under attack by various militia groups in the region that enjoy backing from Iran. That will produce retaliation by American forces. And it's an open question, what the region is going to look like when the last gun is fired.
Hamas is holding over 200 hostages. They're believed to be held captive in Gaza. How does that factor into the Israeli military decisions then and the broader diplomatic moves around what would happen next?
Well, we are already seeing this play out. I think one reason why Israel has not entered the Gaza Strip militarily yet is because of the hostages. A few of them have been released. There's rumors just today that many more might be released. Many of these hostages have dual citizenship. So the countries of their secondary citizenship, I think, are asking Israel to delay its ground invasion to allow time for negotiations to take place. Once the invasion happens, and I think it's pretty clear that this is inevitable, that's it for the hostages. It's very impossible to envision the extraction of hostages in the midst of a bloody land invasion that involves house-to-house fighting of an insurgency that's deeply entrenched in the Gaza Strip. So I think most people involved realize this, and that's why we haven't seen an Israeli ground invasion happening yet. I suspect, like I said, it will, but the hostages are very much part of these calculations.
You spoke a little bit about what you're expecting to come next, and of course the humanitarian crisis being maybe the top of it. I wonder what else you anticipate in the coming days and weeks. Well,
how the forces of radicalism and extremism sort of benefit from this. I think one of the things that no one has really talked about is further attacks. I can easily see, further attacks happening against military targets, possibly civilian targets, Western targets throughout the region by radical elements in the region. That's going to increase the political temperature. It wasn't that long ago where the forces of ISIS started to attack major American cities, increasing the political temperature. That's something that I'm very worried about. And then fundamentally, I'm very worried about, the hardening attitudes that we're seeing right now between Israelis and Palestinians. At the end of the day, most reasonable people agree that there's no military solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict. These two communities have to learn to coexist. But that type of coexistence becomes extremely difficult after, the loss of human life. So I'm very worried about that element that no one seems to really be talking about. There's an assumption that we can sort of resolve this conflict in Israel-Palestine militarily, that if we just eradicate Hamas, we can all go home. Most reasonable people realize that's not the case. And so I'm very worried about the absence of any sort of serious peace process here that can get us to somewhere better.
Nader Hashemi, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Nader Hashemi is an associate professor of Middle East and Islamic politics at Georgetown University in Washington.